Good. All right. Calling to order the City of Essex Junction Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, March 7th at 6:30 p.m. It is 6:35. So, agenda additions or changes. We have an addition from Patrick.
Yep.
For a animating infrastructure.
Pretty
Grant.
much public art grant.
Okay, cool.
Do we want to add that? Where would we like to add that? The agenda.
It could either be I don't know if it's necessarily an update, but it could be letter D under business items if you'd like. It can come at the tail end, I suppose, or
So do you want to start off with it?
I can start off with it. Makes no difference to
Yeah,
me.
why don't we start off with it? If it's fresh in your mind. So we'll add that to the business items,
Okay.
to the beginning of the business items.
Could we also, I know it's getting repetitive, but could we also talk about the rental registry from the last meeting, please? At least an update from Chris, if you have any update.
Sure.
I mean, I watched the meeting, but
Was that going to be in your staff update at all, or?
Yeah, that's where I would have fit it otherwise, yeah.
Should we? So we'll put it in the staff updates then.
Yeah.
Does that work?
I think that's it.
that's fine. That's fine.
Good place.
What was the other addition to the library?
We have Patrick wanted to bring a
A grant.
proposal.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Any other agenda changes? Moving on to the public to be heard. Any comments from the public on items not on the agenda? There's nobody.
There's two people online.
All right.
I see Lexi and Cora.
If anyone has something, if anyone on the Zoom meeting would like to have a statement here, they can raise their hand or say something now.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to the minutes from February 1st. We'll need a motion to approve the minutes.
I will make a motion to approve.
Second,
Now we have discussion. So anything anyone wanted to bring up on the minutes?
I had nothing.
no, I have nothing.
All right, all in favor of approving the minutes as written?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes to approve the minutes.
Cool. Wi-Fi password.
And great, moving on to business items, and yeah, we'll have the grant proposal from Patrick.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think, as I've mentioned a few times, and I finally got around to reaching out to Michelle Bailey at the Vermont Arts Council. The Vermont Arts Council funds different public art projects, and sorry, I'm trying to log in at the same time. And few communities around the state have done this over the past few years, but like in our gateway, our what do we call them? Our arterial, or our gateway roads, to do some kind of public art project that kind of welcomes people into the community a little bit. An example would be like when you pull into Waterbury and you go around the little roundabout and you go under the train bridge, and they now have that like train steel structure. Another example would be, I think it says you're headed into, is it Randolph? Anyway, there's like a concrete wall and they put a bunch of like steel structures on it, like fish or something like that, and just kind of beautify it a little bit. So I've noticed that I think there's some opportunity for us here in the city to do the same. And the one place that I keep coming back to in my mind, especially as I drive back and forth from Williston, is that concrete wall, right, that first home, right as you come up the past the dam. And I don't know if it's worth a Google Street View or not, but
Throw it up there.
I think some type of mural or something, or whether it's, I would prefer mural, but of course, this is all open to a selection process, whether it's a structure or not. I think lends itself to a perfect opportunity for us to do some type of, placemaking, create that right there as you're pulling in, just kind of like a mural that says "Welcome to Essex Junction" of sorts. And so when I reached out to Michelle Bailey, I was thinking about a full blown like implementation grant and like going through the whole process and being like, what does this entail? And knowing that the grant deadline for those is like April 29th or something. So trying to get ahead of it. And she responded with this animated infrastructure and saying that this actually probably fits the idea a little bit better. And what they can offer is a $5,000 design grant, which would allow us to basically put out an RFP for an artist and pay the artist to design and then go through the design selection. And then we could apply for up to $15,000 grant for implementation to then pay that artist to install whatever is designed. They have a required project pitch, like a letter of intent that's due by the end of next week. But I was looking at the criteria and I think we could probably pull it together pretty quick. And based on what they funded in the past, which is what I was trying to pull up some examples of people who were curious. I mean, I think this fits right in with what they typically do. The only, I think the biggest variable in all of this, of course, is the homeowner and whether or not they own that concrete wall, if it's in the right of way. Obviously, I think we'd have to approach them and let them know what our intentions were if we wanted to move forward with this, and let them know that it would be like a Essex, city thing, that city would do the upkeep, that we're just asking for their permission to use the wall, or if it's in the right of way, that maybe changes the conversation a little bit and says, hey, this is what we're intending to do with the wall on the street side that we're going to maintain, as opposed to approaching the conversation of asking permission. But I think that kind of, if we're in favor of that, I'm more than willing to try and put together the letter of intent. Of course, handing it off to the city, to Chris and Jennifer and Regina to take a look at and see if that's something we're willing to try and pursue. It's a tight timeline. I recognize that.
Is there matching? Is there a local match required?
I don't recall seeing something right off the bat. So grants will not require a match, but grantees are responsible for additional expenses above the grant amount. So we'd put forward, a $5,000 budget,
Yeah.
Right.
and if we exceed what they can reimburse us for, then we'd be on the hook.
Right.
I was trying to think if the other entries into Essex Junction have anything, and I can't think of anything really.
There's a smaller concrete wall on the other side of 2A over by the turnoff to the high school. That's maybe knee high, I think, for a little while, right against the sidewalk. But nothing quite as large as something like that I think would be kind of eye-opening, or not eye-opening, but kind of like welcoming. And I see it as like creative placemaking, kind of like a welcome to Essex Junction sort of thing.
I mean, I support it.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
I don't know what we need. I don't know what we need to do as a planning commission other than say we support it. It sounds like it's something that staff, I know you're volunteering to prepare.
Yeah.
that staff would then
Yeah,
submit. So it sounds like it might be up to Chris.
So I think anything that has any financial obligation for the city will require approval by the city council, but that's if there's no match and it's just what runs over, I think they would be very likely to support this idea if it's feasible. And if you could help with the legwork of getting this off the ground,
Absolutely. And I'm willing to help with the grant management of it as well.
Right.
Support the city staff in that as well.
To me, it seems like, it sounds like this location. I think location is something that the planning commission should be set on, and having one single recommendation. I think this location that you suggested, Patrick, sounds very good, but also maybe a ranked location list in case like the
Right.
Landowner isn't supportive or something like that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And it should also say that I don't believe that in receiving this, it renders us ineligible for any future grants from Vermont Arts Council. I think we would have to show that this particular project is closed out or on its way to closing out before they would entertain another application from us. So if we were looking at a potential second or third, other arts funding from them to fund other projects. I think some of the stuff that based on what they funded in the past, other locations around the city that might make sense could be the transit center, and to do some kind of arts project there around the transit center to kind of beautify that spot a little bit. But I know it's also going through its own redevelopment too, so probably want to wait for that redevelopment potentially before we put something in, so whatever we put in doesn't become temporary. I know we've talked about potential stuff here with the park that's supposed to go in front of Firebird Cafe. But depending upon timeline, that could be another project that we just apply to the Vermont Arts Council to in the future. If there's some kind of public art sculpture or something that we'd look to potentially hire an artist to do there.
I should clarify that park, based on the FY 2025 budget that's going to the voters, is on hold. It's but doesn't mean
Depending
it
on a
won't-
handful of factors, right?
Right.
But I know we had talked about, public art added into that as well.
It's also something that's come up numerous times in the strategic planning exercise. So I'm not sure if it'll get into the final document as a standalone. I think there's probably language that'll get in there. I'm not sure an activity, but it may become something that becomes more of a, I wouldn't say formal, but at least some kind of formalized process.
Right.
I don't know much about grants. Would this grant lock you into the location that you apply for, or?
I believe so. I mean, that's what I was just trying to look at and figure out the timeline. And I believe the letter of intent is there. One way of kind of vetting the number of applications you receive to make sure before you actually receive the full application. So they call it their project pitch.
Yeah.
And so we would pitch the project to them, and then they would invite us to complete an application. So by submitting the project pitch, we could then choose not to, or potentially ask them at that point what it would entail to change the location. But
That makes sense.
it doesn't
yeah.
lock us in at that point in time, at this point, to just submit. And I absolutely recognize the short timeline. But based on the feedback I got from Michelle Bailey and what I've seen that they funded in the past, this looks like it would likely be invited to apply for a full application.
So, what do you think about? Do you think it's necessary to try to get concurrence by the landowner first, or is that?
Yeah. I feel like that's all going to kind of have to happen simultaneously in the
Right.
next week. To approach the landowner. And I also do see, planning commission playing a role in the selection process. So the way I kind of see it unfolding is that there'd be, as a planning commission and city, we'd put out a RFP, call for artists, as part of what we would use the $5,000 for, as a call for artists. And then once we've found that artist, to then have them design maybe 2, 3, 4 different ideas based on the space, and then having some form of public process for selection, which is what the Vermont Arts Council really weighs heavily on, is that public process, or community input. I shouldn't say they weigh heavily, but it's a part of it. And so, we can put out a survey through Front Porch Forum, and also say that it's going to be, the decision of whatever installation goes in is going to be a public hearing at the Planning Commission, so it's open to the public, so that there can be general public input, and that the selection will come down to the Planning Commission, which is public.
So
But yeah, I do feel as though we'll need to approach, and I'm more than willing to go and knock on a door and say, if I got the backing of city staff and planning commission, and say on behalf of the city's planning commission and city staff, we're considering applying for an arts grant to put a mural on the front of the concrete wall, the street facing side, that the city would manage and maintain.
Do you have records of whether or not that's public right away?
So I'll have to ask the Public Works Department to see if they know where the boundary is. And when I pulled up on the parcel viewer, it kind of suggests that the right of way is a little bit, but it's not very accurate. I mean, like the parcel viewer is just a starting place.
Yeah, because it goes through the house. Well, there's always that 20 feet from the midline of the road, or there's that 25-foot buffer or something like that, and it feels like it's close. That it's questionable as to which side it lies on.
There could be a question of who owns the retaining wall, though. It could be privately owned, but within the public right of way. I mean, that happens all the time. I think if they were supportive, then all of that doesn't matter.
Right.
And if they're not supportive, I'm not sure you'd want to do this anyway. So, well, actually, it depends how not supportive, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And especially if they are the full owners of it and they're not supportive, then the whole thing's dead in the water.
Right.
I mean, we don't have permission to do it. So.
Right.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I definitely foresee this coming week being knocking on their door while simultaneously writing a pitch, a letter of intent.
So, for timing, you're saying that this needs to, project pitch deadline is March 18th.
Yeah, it's
But
it's tight.
But does that mean it is not? So that's not we aren't obliged to do anything at that
That's the
point.
letter
right?
of intent.
No, that's
right?
just
Then you-
informing the Arts Council that we would like to apply for said project, and then they basically rank them, and then they'll invite a certain number of applicants to put forward a full application.
Right. I'm trying to see if this needs to get on the city council agenda next Wednesday, which would be,
Right.
tough, but not impossible because it's Thursday right now. It sounds like in theory it doesn't because we're not obliged to. I think it maybe if maybe I can have a short memo to describing just what you're talking about here for the consent agenda for the council meeting on Wednesday. Yeah, actually, I just texted Regina. She says it is possible to get this item on if I have a memo ready for tomorrow.
Okay. I'm just trying to also confirm all of the, yeah, so the full proposal, if we're invited, would be due June 3rd.
Yeah.
I guess that, yeah, that's right there as well.
You mentioned alternatives, locations, which if just one that I was thinking of as I was looking at the map, potentially if you still want to go this route, even if the wall doesn't work out, potentially the median on Route 15 as you come into town, having some sort of installation on the median could be
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
something as well.
And that might, isn't the council, doing a branding RFP at some point in time?
Yes, but I'm not sure that branding will probably not. The budget for that is probably not enough to
No,
have
no,
these structures of some.
oh, I know.
Yeah.
I was just saying, it could fit nicely into the introductory sign coming in. Not that it would pay for it, but
So yeah, I think go for I like the wall idea.
So is there a second? So is there a second choice if the wall doesn't work?
I don't know of a second choice for a mural.
No. And the only other large structure that comes to mind is the Five Corners Beverage, like it's that large warehouse that kind of goes off behind it. A mural on the side of that building, Central Beverage, yeah,
that storage facility.
that storage facility that goes behind side, because you can see a large part of the side of that building as you go down 2A.
Oh, going. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not like an introductory.
No, but it could. But I mean, it's not. Yeah, like an intro to the city, but it's a public arts facing a major artery.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as you travel along towards the high school, behind those homes, the only other large
Yeah.
side of open area, yeah, right there, that comes to mind.
But you have to basically look through private property.
Yeah,
Could have
I mean, it
things
would.
blocking it, and they have the right to park trucks there.
Right, right. It's certainly not an ideal, but that's another spot that comes to mind.
Right. Okay.
Which of course would need permission from the building owner to paint a mural on the side of their building.
But they do this yearly.
Yes.
Arts Council.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the grant I approached her with was the cultural facilities grant, which is, those their full implementation applications, or maybe it was an arts project. I think it was the arts project grant actually that's due on April 29th. But she responded with this and said, "Hey, this feels like your description fits more into this, and knowing how early on you are in the stages, you could get basically the $5,000 planning feasibility design grant, I guess as it's called. And I don't think from that design grant we're forced into implementation. It just means we're moving in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could even foresee, even if the homeowner was supportive and it was owned, they would want to know what the design was.
Absolutely.
Right, so-
yeah, and I would invite them into part of the process as well, for sure.
So we would even at that point, we would say, well, they're supportive. Let's go for the design grant because that's the whole point.
Right.
Get money to.
Yeah, hire an
Commission
artist
to
to
design.
commission and design,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know what is needed from us if we need to do any official duty, but I say go for it, Patrick.
I mean, you could probably motion to support this in general, and I'll work. I mean, yeah, I'll
See
work
how-
directly
yeah.
with Patrick
And see how
to.
far we get next week,
Yeah.
basically.
Do I have a motion?
I don't know. Can I motion my own little thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I make a motion to start working on this. What's it called? Animating infrastructure grants with the Vermont Arts Council.
Second.
Right. All in favor of supporting Patrick and having him apply for this, or not apply, but do his pitch for this pitch letter?
Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes.
All right. We'll be in touch.
Great.
Also, Regina thinks that given that a match is not needed, probably don't, and the fact that it's the full proposal is it's not due till June. We don't have to rush this onto the council agenda for next week. But you should probably,
Yeah, we have.
in terms of like door knocking and getting the project pitch together, that's got to happen.
That's got to happen fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah. That was great.
My pleasure.
Moving on to the next business item, which is the neighborhood development area update.
So, neighborhood development area expansion, that is something we applied for that a month ago, and we had the meeting. The downtown board met at the end of February, and this was approved. So I will just share what. Just a reminder of what the boundaries look like. On top of our zoning map, I think that's the most useful version. So here it is. It's going to take a moment to catch up there. But yeah, it was. I'm very pleased to announce that this worked, and that the neighborhood development area is now expanded to the where the dotted blue line goes. So that covers the highway arterial district, where a lot of kind of small to medium-sized development opportunities are happening. And it also covers Riverside by the village, where a few more buildings are still going up. Yeah, this was an interesting case that we put forward because we had stretched what was allowed in terms of the distance from the village center district by quite a bit. You're supposed to go out to quarter miles, like 1/4 mile only, unless specially approved. And actually, their staff did not support going out all the way to cover the highway arterial district, arguing that the highway arterial district seems to go against the smart growth requirements or smart growth goals of the program. They also argue that given the distance from the village center district, this by the book is kind of encouraging sprawl. But I presented the idea that you have to look at the regional context over here and what's already there, and the fact that this is along one of the strongest bus lines in the region, and that a lot of development is happening, and it is replacing strip malls and kind of single family homes there with multi-story, multi-unit developments. And the board ended up unanimously supporting the city's request. So now this is in effect.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Nice work.
Thank you.
Yeah, very exciting considering what continually tries to get pushed through the legislature every year in terms of Act 250 reforms, which neighborhood development area, I believe, is part of that discussion as well. And then I don't know, Chris, if you've seen or if anybody's seen what has come out of the Homes for All. Remember that grant that we tried to apply to? Or you guys? So they did select 5, and they've finished with their study. And I think the training might be next week.
Yes, next week I'll be there.
You're gonna go?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, they did a presentation at our staff meeting last week, and it's pretty cool what they're proposing. And it falls, because we have this neighborhood designated development area. What they're proposing will fall right within the NDA, and allow for basically what they've come up with is like pre-permitted projects for that missing middle housing. Anything from a 1-bedroom up to an 8-bedroom. And if, well, I'll let you go, and then we can have a discussion maybe afterwards and see how, but I think it would be a cool thing for the city to kind of pick up and see if there's anything in order to kind of spur a little bit more development to kind of like, what they're trying to do is pre-package types of development. Say.
Oh, fantastic.
So like somebody could come in and basically say like, oh, I've got this parcel of land, but I don't know what I can do with it. Where do I start? How do I begin? Do I get a permit first? Do I hire an architect? And as a city, we could say, well, if you pick one of these 4 designs, they're already pre-permitted, and you can just hire a contractor and start construction tomorrow. It's basically kind of the idea.
The Sears catalog model.
More, I mean, there's a little bit more involved. That's
Yeah.
a very watered down version of it, but
Yeah.
it seems like a pretty cool idea.
Yeah,
And
that's
if
very cool.
they want it to be like an ultimate toolkit that even if it's not pre-permitted, any homeowner, anybody, landowner could pick it up, and it would walk you through step by step how to develop housing on your parcel.
I saw some. I had heard somebody pitch that idea before as if you want to make many cookies that look good, the best tool is a cookie cutter.
Basically, yeah. It's more or less, yeah. More or less what they've got, what they've developed. So, I'll let you attend, and maybe in the next planning commission meeting, we can have a discussion about what next steps would be
That's it.
when they publish it.
That's great. Look forward to that. Are there any questions about the NDA expansion?
No, the only question, I tried to link to the funding source on the letter, and it comes up as a page not active. So I don't know if that's just under community development or
Sorry, funding source.
the Downtown and Village Center funding directory that was in the letter. If you click on the link, it comes up as to a 404 page, essentially. Not active page.
Where are you finding that letter?
This came with the NDA.
Oh. I will have to take a look at it.
I was just curious to
I
see.
never clicked it. So.
I was just curious to see what funding sources were available.
All right. Moving on to the EV charging discussion.
So this item is largely Jennifer's item. I believe she is online right now. Jennifer, if you're ready, it's here.
We can't.
We can't hear you.
Maybe it's our speaker. We might need a speaker on.
Oh, well, now we lost everybody.
The public was trying to participate earlier. We didn't even. Yeah, try again, Jennifer.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay! Great. I was about to say, I think it's an issue with questions. I probably have to go through sound settings, but glad that got worked out. All right. So let me just scroll down to that page in the packet, just so I can kind of follow along with everything that I've got here. Where should I put it? I've got too many tabs open at the moment. So for this, I tried to look into what surrounding municipalities are doing. what are kind of other examples of legislation in place that we can build off of as a model. And generally what I found was that all these different municipalities were encouraging EV chargers or putting forward a different permitting process, saying this is something that requires, like, it's an accessory structure in this way or whatever, and it requires this kind of permitting versus any kind of standard permitting. But I could not find any examples, any relevant examples from this area of Vermont that required developments to install EV chargers. However, I did find out that South Burlington is looking into this right now. They're talking about this issue with their, I think it's Energy Council or Energy Committee, something like that, and also corresponding with lawyers and the Regional Planning Commission and seeing exactly what they can implement. So this is kind of based off of what I was able to find and put together. First off, there's the existing kind of set of things. We've talked about the RBES and CBES a little bit. This is the Residential Building Energy Standard and Commercial Building Energy Standards. So both of these are requirements that are currently in place throughout the state, and developments under these categories have to certify that they've met certain conditions for these. And it's more of a self-certified part of the development with a little bit less teeth because it's not, there's not a lot of oversight, there's not inspectors checking to see if you actually have met all of these qualifications. So there are some existing standards there about EV charging. That's ones we've talked about previously, with having a certain all of the spaces being EV capable. Yeah. So as for actionable items, I've kind of broken this into different tiers of what level of requirement we want to have. If we want to do it go forward as incentives, just kind of recommending EV chargers. Let's see, first one is to recommend and promote voluntary compliance with RBES and CBES. So this is already something that people have to do, but maybe stating it more clearly and mentioning it like, oh, and just remind us, this is a requirement for RBES, CBS, whatever, including that in some form of oversight. We won't be able to require anything. Like in this version, we can't require anything, but we can just state that it exists and try to encourage people to do that. Municipal incentives, expedited permitting. There's a lot of other things that aren't exactly under the municipality of rebates exist, things like that. And then towards the bottom, these are more of if we are able to require anything. That's something that we're still trying to investigate and look into exactly like how much authority the city has to require things for developments. Because largely our, as we discussed this with, oh gosh, this was a planning, or not planning commission, was it with CCRPC? Chris would remember.
I asked VLCT, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, their municipal assistance program. They have a lawyer there that answers all sorts of questions. It doesn't mean that they're always certain about these things, but his read was that there. I mean, two things. His read was that the CBES and RBES are certainly state standards, and if they're not a part of a city's own regulations, we don't have the ability to enforce them. Although we do require the declaration, like so after you build any building, residential building, the owner signs a declaration. CBES, like commercial 4-story and above buildings, their engineer will sign a declaration saying that this building meets these standards, which includes certain number of EV charging spaces and EV ready spaces. But yeah, he says we'd probably need to include it in a building code, which we don't have, in order to
Make it enforceable.
make it enforceable.
So that is something to consider, but again, we're coordinating with South Burlington's efforts, and they're looking into a similar thing, although I believe South Burlington does have a building code, so their situation might be a bit different, but still we're just trying to learn from their process as we go along as well. But
Jen-
regardless of that,
Sorry, Jennifer, real quick, just
yeah,
in reading this, I might have missed it, but did you see, what does EVSE mean versus the EV capable?
let me
wasn't-
see.
It wasn't clear to me.
Yeah,
I was trying to figure out.
I couldn't figure that out.
EVSC as far as to my understanding, EVSC is when you actually have the charger to plug into
Okay.
the car. It stands for electric vehicle supply equipment, so it includes the whole set that
Okay.
plugs into your car.
Okay.
But what we're talking about here is just EV capable parking spaces.
Well,
We're talking about what do we want to do?
Okay, so,
It could be any of them.
yeah, okay, because I have a number of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we do find if this is something that we can enforce, I took kind of liberty from a couple of existing plans to see what their requirements were and what they kind of look like to give a guideline of, okay, well, this is based on, option one is based on CCRPC's 2014 recommendations, some text from there. Option two for the current existing RBES CBS standards, especially if we're going to be referencing these things, I thought it would be helpful to say, well, this is what that requires. That's what they say. Or the 2024 version, which will be adopted, I think it's as of June, or I think it's July 1st, June or July of this year. And then that would be the current one. So, yeah.
Jen, I had another thought too as to where you might be able to find some regulations when it comes to development. VHFA and VHCB with their affordable housing applications. I do believe now that if they don't require it, having EV, it's either EV ready or EV installed parking spaces adds a number of points to developers' applications. So they would have language around requirements and what they would look for in an affordable housing project that they would be seeking to fund. And I can give you some contacts of individuals if you to give you a starting point of who to reach out to if you're interested.
Sure, absolutely. In a similar vein, something I did include here, I know I've talked about LEED standards for building, just green energy buildings, more building efficiency, things like that. EV charging is something that is on that list that offers a few points. So if you have EV charging on location, that also contributes to LEED, but that's more relevant if we have people who are specifically saying, okay, I need this building to be LEED certified. But yeah, okay. That's helpful. You said it was VHCB?
And VHFA, both the Housing Finance Agency and Housing Conservation Board, since
Okay, cool.
they both, along with our program, but they fund the majority of affordable housing, or not majority, but a large portion of the affordable housing projects, and then have these a lot of energy efficiency standards. The VHCB certainly does, puts a lot of them forward, as you can imagine, being a conservation and housing board. But I do believe if they're not required, they're heavily recommended, and they would certainly have, I would imagine, some guidelines and requirements as to what they look for in the applications and the developments.
All right. Thanks. I've made a note and I will look into it.
Do we want to have discussion, or Jennifer, did you want to go through this a bit more? Did you, or are we open to discussion at this point?
I'm good to open discussion here. I'd like to hear what everyone thinks, and maybe I could clarify things a little more specifically based on whatever needs more clarification.
I I was just, in my mind, when I read this, I was trying to think back to our discussion last time and trying to figure out what this would look like in reality. If you had a building, let's say 20 units, so 20 units would be maybe let's say two EV parking spaces or fully operational charging stations. I'm trying to think, okay, so if you just put in not the cabling, but just the tube, the conduit for the cabling, and made it ready, but didn't have the charging station, what would be the incentive later of the landlord doing anything? You just basically have the tube in there. I'm just trying to think in my mind, okay, so maybe you have one tenant who has a car, maybe not, maybe it's just visitors who come. And if you just have the conduit in there without the cabling, notice in one of these, you actually have to put in the circuit branch and the circuit breakers in. So you've got part of the infrastructure, but you don't have the charging station. So without the charging station being a requirement, I'm wondering what would it look like? You know, what's the incentive for anybody to actually build a charging station?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I assume that the incentive for at least the property owner could be marketing, right? Like we have
Right.
charging capable spots. If you get a car, we could work on installing it down the line, maybe splitting the cost with the tenant or something like that down the line.
Yeah.
But
And a tenant
Yeah.
also, a tenant doesn't necessarily need a level 2. A tenant just needs a level 1. So are you building it for the tenants or are you building for the visitors? So again, I mean, these are just sort of nuts and bolts, trying to think through how they would actually work it out.
I think also to that point, something to think about too is what does the property look like 20 years from now? Because this is, I think the intention of this, even if it's just capable, is that 20 years from now, if we're highly electrified, that the infrastructure is there, and maybe in the future there'll be more incentives to put in the infrastructure, the actual electric chargers.
But you'd probably, if you only have 2 spots out of 20, you're probably going to have to tear up the
Yeah.
pavement anyway and put the other 18 in.
Yeah, well, I'm reading that the 2024 versions would be 1 capable spot per dwelling unit. Is that right?
You talk about the RBES or CBES?
The ARB, that says both. It's option 3, referencing the amended 2024 versions of the RBES and CBES. So required level 2 capable electric vehicle charging parking spaces for all new residential buildings. For a single family home or multifamily building, it would be 1 spot, capable spot per dwelling unit.
Yes.
Right.
And then there's a secondary chart on the following page that has commercial building occupancies. So that's the chart for commercial.
Yeah. So in your and Scott, in your example, a 20 unit would have 20 spots, capable spots
In option 3.
in option 3. That's what I'm understanding the intent of these requirements, or these requirements are to planning for 20 years down the line to make sure all these spots can have chargers in them without tearing up the concrete.
Let me ask another question, which in my mind sounds like a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, you know, my sister has an EV. She plugs it in her garage. So it's a 240 volt charging station in your garage. So if you're a tenant there, all you need is a 240 volt connection. So that's a level 1 charging station.
That's a level 2.
Yeah, 240 is level 2.
Is that what people have in their garage?
Well, I mean, if some people have that in a garage, it's level 2 would be basically what comes out, like what you use for your dryer.
Okay, so that's a level 2.
Yeah.
So level 3 is what's at Hannaford's?
Level 3 would
There's
be
a
a supercharger. a Tesla
Supercharger, yeah, like the stuff.
So like over at
Level 2 is what's
Foodies,
ahead.
not Foodies, Felino's. at,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And there's one in town of Essex as well.
okay.
But level 2 is probably the most commonly used one now for residential purposes. Just now that the cars have gotten bigger, level 1 doesn't really do much unless you aren't driving very far. So it does look like the updated or the red line version of the RBES is really going towards level 2. I think one thing that's really that's really important over here is the fact that I think the RBS and CBES are being regularly updated, and they're relatively strong. I think. I mean, they're relatively strict. My worry, as we see development applications go through, is that they're not always being adhered to. And this is what I think this is central to what needs to be figured out over here. Like, can the municipality either require anything, or would it? I think at the bare minimum, would it be helpful for the municipality just to always mention this? Every time a development application comes through, if on a staff report we have a section about EV charging, and then preface it by saying this is not under municipal jurisdiction, but we understand that in order to meet these requirements, which the state requires already, which you will self-certify, this is how many spaces you need. Will you please include this in your drawings, because we need accurate drawings no matter what you're going to build.
Okay, and for that one, I do want to mention the other documents following this, since we're referencing RDS and CBS. So we've also attached those within the packet. They should be just following the section on EV charging. I highlighted in yellow every place where it mentions or certifies level EV2, like anything related to electric vehicles. So first when you see RBES, just one little checkbox, don't even have to specify how many. And then on the second page for the CBES, it's only on the first page of that document, there's a small section there that says, what the requirement is, total number of spaces, and so forth. Since that one is usually more percentage based versus, just saying that there's one per dwelling unit. So you can say, like, just showing that's the form that's on the other side of this. So I find that it's really helpful to reference these standards and say, yeah, this exists, because the actual form doesn't feel like it has much teeth, but it is an existing state requirement.
But we don't require it.
We require them to give us the signed,
self-certify.
the signed copy of that.
Okay.
But we don't have the power to check.
I mean, one station per dwelling unit in a 40-unit, 30-unit apartment, like, that just seems like a lot. Now, I could certainly see where we would find it advantageous to have a percentage that maybe like 1 for every 10 housing units, so that they would be installing 3 stations, but then maybe including the conduit and infrastructure for the additional units, so that at a point in time in the future, you don't have to rip up the pavement per se, but the conduits and the infrastructure is in place to add more.
I mean, I don't see that as a major additional cost. The conduits.
But to require for 30 units of housing, 30 stations to be put in.
No, it's only 30
capable. That means
so-
that means having the infrastructure.
Oh, having the infrastructure. Oh, okay.
Not
okay.
the actual electric.
Okay, sorry, misunderstood that.
Yeah.
In fact.
But then on that, I mean, so then I guess, just to complete my thought, then having some kind of requirement to put in at least 1 or 2
Yeah.
stations would be good.
Yeah, I brought this up in our last meeting of like, because I do have an EV, and that I think, this is my own opinion, but I think that like as an EV driver, the most important thing is that I have a spot to charge. And whenever I go anywhere that like it's only 2, I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense. I'm not gonna, like, they're usually taken, and I'm just not gonna charge. And I have a hybrid, so I can just drive on gas. But it's like the ease of accessibility is like the most important part in order for adoption. So I was saying,
Absolutely.
like, is our intention to encourage adoption, or is our intention to have minimal accessibility? And so I think that depends. I think maybe we could do a mix with the EV capable spots,
Yeah.
and then requiring a certain number.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, my first thought on this was I'm not surprised that South Burlington is doing their own thing, because I'm pretty sure they got rid of parking requirements for residential builds. And so they're probably figuring out, how does this apply?
Right.
If we don't have parking
How do we not
requirements, how
enforce
do we,
parking
how
requirements?
do we enforce charges? So I'd be interested to see what they do, because we didn't go that far, but we only require, it's one per dwelling unit as well, right?
What? Yes.
Yeah.
I
One
think
parking spot.
even for South Burlington, though, even when they don't require it, I think the reality is that
Well, sure,
do,
yeah.
They're putting it in
and
anyway.
are installing parking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the big crux here, is that obviously we're in Vermont. There is incentive to put parking in. You can't really get around even Chittenden County without a car very easily. But I don't think there's as much of an incentive to put EV chargers in for developers.
It sounds like what South Burlington is looking at is also trying to figure out if they could ride on the coattails of the CBES and RBES. And to be clear, CBES is what applies to many of the buildings we're looking at, 4 stories and above, all CBES. And CBES, I don't remember if Jennifer included a link to the actual CBS standards, but it's what I had on the screen a moment ago, and it actually requires a certain number of spaces to have the EVSE, the supply equipment, installed. It's not many, but it's basically along the lines of every space has to be EV ready, and then 1 or 2 needs to have the supply equipment. And it's even to me, it seems achievable. Nobody's going to break the bank by doing that. It's just
Well, there are a lot of grant programs out there.
And
that
there are a lot of
funded
grants.
and the state has a couple themselves.
Right.
To fund these sort of things too.
right.
So if we ride the coattails of the RBES and CBES, what is the downside to also incorporating those requirements in the LDC, so that we also have to?
I think there's no downside as long as it is legal, and the VLCT thinks that the land development code is not the right place for this, and because zoning regulation is only supposed to deal with location of structures, and land use, and as it relates to certain public interests. They think that this would have to be in a building code or ordinance. So, I mean, I don't know if I can confidently say that is like definitely true, and like that won't have any effect in the land development code, because I think it does have to do with the location and place of certain things, structures. I mean, if you can have a whole zoning system that requires zoning permits to put in a EV charging equipment, which we don't require that, but if you're allowed to do that, then to me it seems a little bit weird that we wouldn't be allowed to to require compliance with, or at least require drawings that show that you comply with existing state rules.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many other things in the LDC that are required that we can't then say 2 charging stations. It just seems kind of ridiculous.
I think it is. I think we can ask around a little more, and also we'll check with our own municipal attorney to see if she has an opinion on this.
Yeah.
I do think at the very least, with all the projects in the pipeline, it wouldn't be too difficult for us to comment on these things, even if there's no ability to to enforce it. I think if it is brought to the attention of everyone in the room that is technically a requirement,
If it's a requirement, if they're required to do that,
Right.
then yeah, I think it makes the most sense. We should have that. We should have that comment. It should be in the staff report.
right. Okay.
Seems the same with lighting, and all of that stuff that we
Yeah,
check and that the DRB checks on every application.
Yeah. I think the only thing that the VLCT was saying that is that they don't think it can be a condition of approval.
but just to come back, I support what Phil was saying, is that I think EV capable, I think should be maximized or optimized so that all the spots could eventually be hooked up without tearing up the pavement. But that we should promote EV charging stations, fully equipped charging stations.
I mean, it sounds like that as of July 1st or June 1st, whichever one that was, that's part of the requirement going forward with the RBES. So
Well, I'm a little bit, it seems to me a little bit ambiguous, but
I don't think that option 3 is ambiguous at all. Required level 2 capable electric vehicle charging parking spaces for all new residential buildings, 1 per dwelling unit.
Right. I mean,
Whichever
option
was
3 is basically saying that we would put the RBES or reference the RBES and CBS in the municipal regulations somehow, whether that's zoning or ordinance, and then therefore have the ability to check for that and require that as a condition of approval.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that we would do that. I'm just saying that that seems to be what's going to be implemented as of July 1st. So
Right.
even if we're only referencing it,
Yep.
or promoting, or what did we, if we're doing option A, recommending and promoting voluntary compliance with RBES as of July 1st, that's what people need to do to comply with RBES.
That's correct.
Yeah. I agree. It's a little confusing about what we need to do though as a city.
Well, if I hear the room correctly, like there's interest in pursuing, like actually adopting the matching the RBES and CBES requirements if it is possible, if there's a legal way to do it, right? And if that's if the commission is interested in that, we will continue to explore that. And in the meantime, I think it is, we're falling back on what we can do, which is encourage voluntary compliance and bring these issues to light and just comment on these things and mentioning them every time we see a development application come through. Is that about? Am I hearing the room right?
yeah, I think you summarized it.
I assume that we could not offer incentives to if developers were not meeting these requirements, right? Because this is state level.
That was my question. Who owns the RBES and CBS?
State.
Yeah.
Right. Because I had a thought of like, well, if it was if it was too much of an impact on a developer to do this, perhaps an incentive could say, okay, well, maybe a percentage of your spots are public parking. And if they open them up to public parking, which then helps the public. But it sounds like, but this being a state requirement, they would need to meet this anyway.
They're supposed to. Yeah.
They're supposed to.
They're supposed to. They have to sign a thing that
Yeah.
we get a copy of that says they're complying.
Yeah, so I'm saying we couldn't offer incentives to not meet a state requirement.
Right. I think Winooski had somewhere in their zoning bylaws, they count each electric vehicle space as like 1.5 spaces for towards their minimum parking requirements. I don't think at this point, I don't think it would make any difference given that we've dropped it down to 1. And most developers are aiming for something higher than 1. So like, they're I don't think it really has any traction anymore.
Yeah, the only other thing I thought of that was like, it's bigger than planning commission. It's like citywide would be like, if the city somehow owned the charging, then the city gains whatever benefits or incentives there are for installing chargers. That, you know, if there's tax credits or anything like that, that's like a whole other thing, or incentives for putting in chargers around the city. I only thought of that because my mother was recently working with Sunrun in one of their models where they install solar at your house, but they own it, and so they get all the tax incentives and all the benefits. And it's like that's how their model works, because they own it, but then you get solar power. And so that was just a thought I had of some other way of incentivizing chargers across the city.
I mean, that sounds innovative, and but also I'm not sure I've seen other cities do that on private property, but plenty of cities have on-street public EV charging. Montreal has them all over the place now. It's like actually parallel parking spaces where you can drag over a electric hose to charge up your car.
I think as a city, we potentially look into it. I mean, there are good, as I mentioned before, good state grants that would help offset the cost. You probably don't know, but is it being considered as part of the transit center, adding some EV stations with that new redevelopment?
We don't know yet, but the Crescent Connector will have
some over
will
there.
have 2 EV
Excellent.
charging spaces.
Excellent.
And we also have the public parking behind the Firebird Cafe.
Right, and that doesn't have any, but we do
No,
have
it
a
doesn't
public.
have any.
We do have one here.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So do we need to make any sort of decision on this, or I think
A recommendation or.
I mean, if I'm hearing the room right, that we're like that, if it's possible, we should continue to explore the like any legal options to add, to add municipal requirements that match the RBES and CBES. We can do that.
Yeah, this was primarily to get information to you and get feedback from you about what level of requirements you think we should implement and how we should proceed from here.
yeah, I think that does that make sense
Yeah.
to everyone? Yeah, that sounds right. All right, we want to move on to the we have a sign regulations
Sign regulations.
presentation.
Yes. So I don't have a memo for this because I actually think this is easier in this format and maybe a little more fun. But we started by trying to copy what Burlington has already.
Right.
But there are a lot of exceptions. There are a lot of situations that I want to make sure didn't fall through the cracks. So I took those regulations and I started testing them, some of the actual signs out here, seeing, comparing what it does. And the question for the planning commission is, in these cases, does this make sense? And do we need to make any tweaks? So I think the examples I'm going to show here, they start off pretty simple, and then I think they get more ambiguous as we go on.
Awesome.
So yeah, and I would say, as I did this, I also talked with some of the municipalities around us to see, and I looked at their regulations to see how they differ, other than just Burlington's. They're like they differ quite widely. So clearly, there's no right answer. It's just what what fits for this community. But we got to watch for unintended consequences. So example one over here, these, I think they consider these are directional signs. They're saying, I think this is what the sign actually says. I think it's on the right of way, but under the 2023 Land Development Code, these are considered directional signs, and there's a 3 square foot limit for them, so they're not in compliance. And under the proposed amendments, there's something similar. It actually requires it to be 2 square feet or smaller, and oriented towards internal use. This is clearly not oriented towards internal use, so not in compliance. And I think, once this gets through, it might, if this sounds good, if this makes sense, the enforcement, like, this would be subject to enforcement.
Yes.
Probably medium priority. I think, I put this prioritization thing because, like, there are so many things that are a little bit out of compliance, but it depends on how much impact it has on other people.
And we're scaling that at high, medium, low.
Yeah.
Okay. Not like medium.
Can you go back to the directional signs real quick?
Yeah.
Back to the actual sign.
Yeah.
So is this, the area is being determined by, how is it measuring here, the area of the sign? Is it from the base?
Well,
all the way to the top?
3 square feet, it would be any piece of this.
No, I know.
That. But I think the intention of the directional sign allowance is, like within a parking lot, if it says more parking that way or something. Yeah, but those signs are about this size. They're not that.
So you basing the sign off of, I guess, architectural salvage warehouse as one component, not 3 separate pieces?
So if this is treated, this is measured the same way as a freestanding sign, because, like, really this is a freestanding sign, I think, under if they were trying to make something like this permanent, it would be all the parts that have lettering from the top piece to the bottom. So from the 11 Maple piece to open 9 to 5, you would take the area of that, and all the space in the middle, that would still be considered a part of the sign.
Yeah.
But the post at the bottom, that would not be considered a part.
Right. No, I can totally see it. It's all for the same entity.
Right. But it seems, I mean, I'm gonna assume this makes sense. Like, this looks pretty janky. Maybe it shouldn't be allowed.
well, and now that the connectors going in, they might be more apt to put in something out directly in front of their door instead of something offset that is trying to direct people into a driveway.
Yeah, and actually they have
They have
all
more
these
street.
signs already. What's over here is already done. These are their official signs. This is what they have a permit for.
Yeah, then that other one.
Right.
I walk my dog by there every single day, and it just becomes background. I mean, it's,
Right.
and when you show it like this, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah,
Okay.
excellent.
Next example. So this is an advertising banner. It's kind of like it's on the outside of a building, but you don't really see it. It's not that apparent from the street. It's on 27 Park Street. Under the current LDC, it is not allowed because it advertises products, but that is not content neutral. So actually, that doesn't quite the stuff. There's no stipulation about advertising versus not advertising in the proposed amended LDC. This probably, I think, would count as a temporary banner, so it would only be allowed for a certain number of days, and you would have to take it down. To me, that doesn't seem to be a big problem. Like, this is probably the enforcement priority for something like this would be pretty low because it's not, you don't really see it from the street. I mean, if someone complains, then and if someone complains and we tell them to take it down, it also doesn't hurt them that much. So, like, to me, that's kind of that seems to suggest this is not something that we have to worry too much about. Okay. Stop me if if you want to.
I mean, you could also add a size component to this, right? Because I'm not reading a size component. So you could have a temporary banner that is gigantic.
Oh, there's a size limit. There's a size limit.
Oh, there is a size.
Yeah, this is
Oh,
the summary of what I
Okay.
thought was most pertinent. And I think you should all have a copy of the land development code amendments in Word format. Much easier to look through that than in the previous PDFs. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'm thinking of is how this is in comparison to like a Quickie Mart or a gas station that has advertisements in the window. But I guess those aren't something about not quite necessarily attached to the window. They're usually like, well, some.
I guess I'm just thinking is that for banners the size that you showed, do we really care if they're temporary?
Right.
And so maybe, right, it's really just the size, I think, at that point that matters.
So you might be able to permit this as a wall sign.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what material is made of is, I mean, I think it is regulated, but I don't think you're not allowed. A floppy material, it isn't excluded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was going to. 'Cause
Right.
Then would
Yeah,
we
it
look
could be
at like a
wall
gas station that says, well, you can only put up that advertisement for that product twice a year, but they leave them up 24/7.
Right. So if you were to permit this as a part of a wall sign, then it would go towards the total square footage allowed. And we will discuss that more in another example as for wall signs, because I think that's a hard one, and there are some decisions to make there. This is another example. This is kind of actually what you're talking about. This is multiple banners kind of being used as a wall sign. They don't have permits for that, but under these rules, if they leave it up for more than the temporary the temporary amount of time, they would have to get it permitted as a wall sign. Seems reasonable, right?
Yeah.
So here we go. This one, yeah, so this over here is, I think under the current rules, we would count that also as a banner, but banners are not allowed on utility poles. Doesn't say whether or not that utility pole is private or public. Under the proposed amendments, this would probably just count as a temporary sign, so it would just be up. It'd be allowed for a certain amount of time. But they can't have that up forever. I mean, to me, it's not the end of the world for McDonald's to not be able to advertise cold brews on their utility pole for most of the year. They've got plenty of places to advertise. So I mean,
Agreed.
does this make sense? Like that they can't just have something up there forever?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
opening the door to them putting a sign on every utility pole as
Right.
long as they want.
So then I was testing this example. This is a publicly owned banner. We have an exemption right now that says special event signs and banners in the right of way are fine. And then I just double checked to make sure there's a similar exemption. And yes, official signs put up by the municipality or at the direction of a municipality are fine. This is a fun one. Neon window signs
Yeah.
at the Good Stuff store.
So
So
Diane's not here to talk about it.
the only
the
sign,
trees in front.
I'll say over here, the only sign that has a sign permit is this that says Good Stuff as a wall sign. Everything else does not have a permit. But according to our current rules, you don't need a permit. Those are window signs, which you're allowed to cover up to 25% of your windows. No permit required. I think the internally illuminated signs, like neon signs, there are limits to how many. I think it's like 1 or 2 if it's in the village center district, but anywhere else, you just treat it like a window sign. You can cover 25% of your windows with neon signs. And I thought surely under the Burlington rules that would not be allowed, but actually,
I brought
It's
this
also
up.
allowed.
I brought this up. I said 25% of your windows, if it was neon, would be a lot. It would be a lot of neon.
Right. The only difference with Burlington's rules is that a permit would be required. And to me, it seems like, yeah, I mean, that's a big difference. So yeah, so I think there's some policy choices here for window signs. Two parts to this. Should there be a quantity limit for internally lit window signs? And these neon signs are considered the internally lit window signs. Should permits be required? And then should there be limits for non-illuminated window signs? And also should permits be required? Right now we don't require permits. As it's written right now, we would start requiring permits for everything, and that includes. Let's see. Like, let me show you. Like these, right here, would count as non-illuminated window signs, and to me, it would be a little bit annoying for us to have to permit those.
It's true.
But I wouldn't mind. I think it at least requiring permits for illuminated signs maybe could make sense. And I don't know if you want to allow.
Wasn't there also a rule about it being on certain stories, certain levels?
First and second are okay.
Oh, first and second are okay.
First and second, also under the Burlington rules, you're supposed to leave most of the space that's like head level clear. So this is where, I mean, I could really use feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would hate to make a decision based on like making it look like we're picking on one commercial entity. I just wonder if there are other examples around the city where there are illuminated signs as well.
There are
Or
many.
is that really the only example?
There are many open signs, but there are some open signs. So I will say Winooski adopted sign like zoning bylaws that now prohibit neon signs altogether. There are a lot of them that are grandfathered there. Actually, I'm looking across right now. I think actually that's inside the building. Never mind. But
So aesthetically, in my opinion, aesthetically, the example you provided, that's not my aesthetic, but in my opinion, I don't think it creates a nuisance. And I don't think it creates a nuisance based on where it is. So it points to a main artery of the city that already has a lot of illumination. In my opinion, if it was on the sides of the building pointed towards other buildings next to it, that would create a nuisance. And so I'm curious if there's any way to kind of incorporate that into the
Street
language.
facing versus non.
well, there's certainly. I think nuisance is one prime reason to regulate things, but also, I mean, aesthetics is a valid reason as well. Like, why do we care that those feather banners have to be banned or sandwich boards have to be put away or like that? Part of it is aesthetics and business development, and an image. Yeah, basically establishing ground rules that promotes business in general.
I mean,
But
I'm gonna say this somewhat similar thing is, personally, I don't really like that. The fact that it's on Pearl Street is different. If it was right around the corner here in the village center, I would find it obnoxious. But that's my personal opinion. Whether or not I want to regulate that is another thing. I also find window signs, non-illuminated window signs that cover 75% of the window in the village center. I find that personally difficult because I think the character of the village center loses its aesthetics when you have the windows completely covered up. But that's my personal opinion. Whether or not I want to regulate that, or it's difficult to say. I mean, I don't even notice that quite honestly.
Yeah,
Because
and
I'm
I-
driving by, I'm not walking by, but I walk by all these places around here all
Yeah.
the time.
And the type of, it fits the type of business. Like that aesthetic fits the type of business.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's, you know, it's
In your face.
marketing in its
In your
own right and
face.
branding.
Yeah.
So could it be a zoning thing, district?
Well, it's already not allowed in the village center. That many. wouldn't be
Yes.
allowed in the village center.
Well, actually, it was under the old. We'd have to make sure that is the case if that's the intention. So okay, maybe should there be quantity limits in certain districts?
I mean, I think that would be something to consider. I mean, again, if I'm walking around the village center, I don't want to see 16 neon signs in a building. But you know, like you said, there are some open signs. There's one right across the railroad tracks at
Yeah.
Mango, for example. There's two, I think. That doesn't bother me. But if they had 6,
Yeah, it's a little excessive.
And I guess also this example is showing, you know, one type of neon sign, but I've also seen in Burlington like pretty creative ones about for other businesses, like a noodle shop with
Yeah.
like chopsticks that move around.
Yeah,
Whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then let's say so I can revisit this quantity limits. You know, I'll think of something that seems to make sense. Yeah, and put it in the next draft that you can see. So we'll try to keep the village center district low on, like, you know, limit it to 1 or 2 per business, and as we go along Pearl Street, maybe relax the limits.
Yeah, in a transit-oriented district, a little
yeah,
bit more relaxed.
yeah.
Okay.
Would you exclude an not to dig deeper, would you exclude an open sign from that,
No,
Somewhere,
I think
from that number? Like one, or if you're only, let's say you're limited to 2, would you exclude a classic open sign or closed sign from that?
you mean that would be an additional one?
I'm not sure that that would step on content neutrality. If we like,
It's a good point.
right, like a sign is a sign. I mean, and under most circumstances, I don't know why Burlington also does, like, has directional signs separate. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe there's certain categories, but I figured they would have thought about it. Okay.
That was a very deep discussion.
Okay. Should permits be required? So for illuminated signs, should permits be required? Right now, if you don't say anything, the answer is going to be yes, because that's what the draft says.
Is that what you want?
Yeah,
I don't for illuminated signs. I wouldn't mind having a handle on that. I think it would be pretty burdensome to have to check on all the non-illuminated window signs.
Yeah. I agree.
well, that makes sense. And then the permit ensures that they fit the code. So it meets the deep discussion we just had.
Okay. So would it be so for non-illuminated signs? Would we say this? Would you say this 30% coverage with specific limits on window area and head height is good enough? Like, I think it's kind of good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then permits required. I would prefer if permits were not required for non-illuminated.
I don't think there's a need for
yeah,
that.
that's fine.
Excellent. Okay, next one. Now we're getting into things where we're actually dealing with complaints, and this is related to some of our enforcement actions, and you know whether or not an alternative pathway to compliance is being offered. So in this case, Asian Mart, let's say, has 2 wall signs. I mean, in reality, this is 2 wall signs, but actually one of them was treated as was permitted as a directional sign by the previous administration. But I don't really think I mean, that's a wall sign, I think. It certainly doesn't fit the dimensional requirements for the a directional sign. So right now, the LDC says you are only allowed one wall sign per business, and the size is based on the length of your wall. Under the proposed amendments, there are no limits on quantity. You can split your total allowance into as many as you want. So, does that make sense?
It does to me, yeah.
Yeah. So, and how does this compare with other jurisdictions? Burlington seems to allow a total area limit. South Burlington allows up to 2 wall signs per tenant. They last worked on their regulations in 2010. And they were really thinking about Williston Road. I mean, which is to me a pretty similar situation to Pearl Street. They are revisiting again and thinking of increasing it to 3 wall signs per tenant, but only for single tenant buildings, and everything else would be 2. But if we go with Burlington's rules, it's as many as you want. Okay, and then Winooski allows primary and secondary sign, but they require them to be quite a bit smaller, but they are also much more urban context. So no limits, no quantity limits. That's a default right now.
Do you we're requiring permits?
The permits would be required, yeah, but it's just quantity limits. Right now it's 1, but
So what would give you an authority to deny a permit?
if it goes over the total allowance,
allowance.
the square footage.
And there is a total
Yeah.
square footage allowance.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
How big that.
And
So 1 wall sign, no permit required, more than
No,
one.
one wall sign permit required, but right now you're only allowed 1. If you try to apply for a second one, you're supposed to be denied. This to me seems to have slipped. Yeah, I mean, this was treated as a directional sign, but I don't think it technically would have qualified.
Sure. But the question we just answered was, we said no permits for
no, there are permits for the
non-illuminated wall sign.
No, a non-illuminated
windows.
windows.
Window sign. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
It is a wall sign. This is on the exterior, much more
Yeah,
visible.
come on, Phil, keep up.
It's getting late. Sorry.
Okay. So if I'm not hearing strong opinions on this, then we'll go with Burlington's. No limit on quantity. Okay, and then so here, small wall signs. Like how do the regulations deal with size right now? So this little supermarket here is just for as an example, it's 12. That size 12 square feet. Right now, you are allowed. What is it? So it's the number your linear feet of facade times 15, which is really thinking about height, times 5%, or 20 square feet, whatever is bigger. So there, in this situation, they would have been allowed 20 square feet. I mean, so they have this is 12. They were allowed to make it a little bit bigger. Under the new rules, it doesn't start at 20. It's just 2 square feet per linear foot of facade. So in this case, 25 linear feet of facade. Yeah, this would be about 50 square feet maximum sign size. So basically, I think the low end minimums are work a little bit differently under the Burlington rules. Basically the Burlington rules allow for larger signs for small and medium sized storefronts. Does that make sense?
I like that. I mean, in my personal opinion, those small signs on that large facade,
You can barely see that.
but yeah, it doesn't really make much sense.
And it's a small business. They could use some help.
So
So in essence, the one you're referencing is the smallest one right next to the
Dinky,
pole,
this dinky little one, yeah.
and that meets the 20 square foot requirement at the moment.
Yeah, that's 12. This is actually 12. So,
12.
you would be allowed to, yeah,
So
maybe.
they'd be allowed to like triple it, quadruple it.
Right. So under the Burlington rules, they would be allowed 50. So really, like, it would be like the width of their whole storefront, 2 feet.
Right, but we also have limits on the length of the storefront. Wasn't that on the next slide? So they wouldn't be able to actually span that, utilize that full
They would. I mean, under the
2 square feet per linear foot.
2 square feet per linear foot. But like, if you go, so if your
Linear.
linear feet, if you're 25 linear feet in width, you have a sign that is 2 feet in height and 25 25 feet
Oh, right,
in width,
but they-
you would be using up the full space.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of it proportional. Like you're not going to get much visibility from the
Yeah, you're not, if it's 2 feet high.
2 feet
yeah,
high,
you
so
wanna
they're
make
probably
it-
going to go, and
It's
then
gonna
it
be
will
like,
shrink.
it's gonna be like 6x8.
Well, actually, if you go down Church Street in Burlington, there's plenty of examples where, like, a restaurant would have about 2 by. They would actually, some of them are just the width of their entire storefront, 1 or 2 feet, and just single lettering that goes across. It looks nice sometimes.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I'm just thinking in this particular example, like in that example you gave, yeah, because you're walking next to it, but from Pearl Street looking in at that distance, a sign that's 2 feet, like I don't think they despite going the 50 feet, they're not going to gain very much. So they would,
Yeah,
in all likelihood, go higher, which the
Right.
requirement would be they wouldn't be able to span the full 50
Right.
foot. Yeah.
the property might also have its own restrictions.
Awesome.
Tenant signs.
True. True.
The low end seems fine. I would say that, like, as we go, maybe you're going to get that next, as we go bigger,
Yeah.
it makes sense. Maybe it makes sense to have setback included in that.
That's a good thought. Because the next thing I have here is large wall signs. So this is the example probably of one of the larger ones. This is 121.5 square feet. They right now they would be allowed 169 square feet. So under the proposed rules, so under Burlington's rules, there's a 200 square foot absolute maximum. I mean, this would be under it, but nothing could go beyond that. How does this compare with other jurisdictions? South Burlington has an absolute limit of 100 square feet. And Winooski's is way lower, but Winooski's, you're looking at things
Pretty close.
pretty close as well. So, does 200 really make sense? I think that's up for discussion.
Setback idea is an interesting
Yeah,
one.
I think, because to me that looks fine. Big lots. In fact, if it was bigger, it would look fine,
Right.
in my opinion. But it's set so far back from the road.
Yeah.
If that was good times, it would be a different story.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Right.
I mean, it would be the storefront.
Yeah. So I think potentially seeing what setback could do to it. It would be interesting to see what some of this would look like in the village center too,
Yeah.
right? Like what does the biggest sign that,
So
tenant here could have or a building here could have?
Good Lot's facade would be the length of the building?
Yes,
big-
yes, it would.
It would be the length of the
big. You
building?
mean big?
Big lots. Yeah.
Big lots.
No, but go back to good times.
Good stuff. That's what
Good stuff.
It would be the whole width. Yeah,
The
that's
whole
right.
width, the whole length of the building.
Right. They would be allowed a massive sign.
So they could have 200 square feet there. If they could fit it under the window.
I don't think they would have. Actually,
they-
maybe because the Burlington ones regulations are 2 square feet per linear foot. That looks like 50. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly how, but it would be. It could potentially be a lot bigger unless there was some rule about setback.
Yeah.
Could they install a neon flashing light sign on the roof that was 200 square feet?
No, because the illuminated requirement is only 3 square feet.
Oh, well, that's for
Right.
windows.
That's for window.
Windows.
I actually had to check.
I mean,
So
could you have a neon sign that's on your facade?
Oh, for an illuminated walls.
I don't think you can, but I have to check.
You could just see them putting something on the roof. I mean,
Well, flashing is definitely not.
or even if it was just a neon sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, that considers the
Illuminated.
development of that hotel, they're gonna wanna put signs up too.
So I will check that. But in terms of size limits, what do you have any kind of concepts for how it could be worded, or like what the parameters could potentially be if it was by setback? Or should it be by zoning district? I mean, everything, if it's by zoning district, it's easier to incorporate because there are a lot of different regulations by zoning district.
Yeah.
But at the same time, zoning district is not necessarily like TOD is supposed to aim for a future where that kind of setback doesn't exist anymore. So,
Yeah, that was why like I didn't think about zoning district, because good stuff and big lots, they're the same zoning district.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why I thought setback. But
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I think it's possible, but if you don't have any wording in mind, I can try to come up with something.
I don't have any wording in mind except for the further back you are, the bigger your sign can be.
Right.
I think that word for word technically, that's the,
Especially for older folks who have bifocals.
Okay.
I
Right.
mean, I can't think of any technical jargon you can go with that either.
Yeah.
Or what,
Okay. So next example here, then multiple types of signs. So can you have a blade sign? Little what we currently call projecting signs, the little ones, plus a wall sign, plus a window sign, plus a freestanding sign. Right now, apparently we have the community development department has just by default been allowing up to 2 permitted sign types. So because window signs don't require permits, they've never, they haven't counted towards this. But the application form allows for 2 sign types. But when I was looking through the LDC, I didn't actually see anything that materially restricted the number of types of signs that you had. So under the Burlington rules, certain combinations of sign types. This is in that table where it was saying like, can you combine this type and that type? Certain types cannot be combined, but other than that, you can have as many types as you want. Oops, sorry. This is the next thing. Yeah. Does that make sense? I mean, to me, I don't see a big problem with that, but does that
no, makes
Makes
sense
sense.
to regulate the combination.
right?
Yeah.
Then you wouldn't be
But basically, no.
picking on good times, but you put all those neon signs and then a giant projected lit up sign on top, like,
Yeah.
you're like, no, you only get one type of illumination. Like, yeah, no, it makes sense to ban certain combinations.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, and now here we go. Sandwich boards. This is probably the hardest. I mean, this is the piece of enforcement that has been probably on the minds of many city councilors and probably many people on the streets who think about this kind of stuff, if they do. But it's also been difficult to deal with in the absence of a clear set of rules in the LDC that offers businesses a pathway into compliance without just being like you can't have anything like that you're trying to do. So right now limits are you have to have it maximum 15 feet from the door, only allowed during business hours, and to be honest, majority of them are not in compliance. Many of them are far further than 15 feet from the door, and especially when they're more than 15 feet from the door, they don't bring them in. It's pretty heavy. Under the Burlington rules, it's pretty similar. 15 feet from the door, only allowed during business hours. And that, and let me just go back to the pictures over here. This over here, you know, this is further down. I mean, you probably know, I'll know where this is. This is further down Pearl Street.
Yeah.
Some of these businesses are at the back of the building, so this is like their only. I mean, they could vie for some space on this wall sign. I mean, this freestanding sign, but for whatever reason, they aren't. Some of them aren't able to get on that, and
Cheaper and easier.
right, this is certainly cheaper and easier. We've got this one over here. That's the real estate guy that puts jokes on the board. Apparently, some people really like that. But this is more than 15 feet from the door. It's out all the time. In order to, under the proposed rules and under the current rules as well, this would have to be a part of the main sign. They would have to redesign their freestanding sign to incorporate the marquee. This sign over here, more than 15 feet. Sometimes I see it sitting on the walkway directly. I mean, that wouldn't be allowed under existing or proposed. And yeah, so what do other municipalities do? 15 feet, and does 15 feet from the door really make sense given our urban form? Winooski does not have a 15-foot limit. South Burlington also doesn't have a 15-foot limit, but they say something along the lines of like it needs to be. Actually, they're thinking of changing how they regulate sandwich boards. Right now, they're treating them as temporary signs, which means they can't have them out for more than a certain number of days. But they are trying to adopt something that would allow one per business at a reasonable distance from their main entrance, the principal entrance, or something like that.
What is the main complaint about the sandwich boards?
I don't hear much reasoning behind the complaints. I just hear that there's a sandwich board out. It's annoying. It's it's not allowed.
It's annoying.
But I think, if I were to guess though, like aesthetics is a part of it. When you have a lot of these out, it does.
Well, it's cluttered. I mean,
it looks cluttered and looks a little cheap. And they do blow over. If they're not placed correctly, they get in the way of pedestrians. Part of that is, just making sure that they're placed in the location that's allowed. But
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of what I was getting at with wondering is that personally, I don't see an issue with them, but I could see a safety issue if they get blown over into sidewalk, into the road, which I assume is why there's probably the regulation that they be brought in.
well, there's also
Business hours.
there's also the fact that they kind of like we require permits for freestanding signs. If we're lax on sandwich boards, it's kind of a way around it, right? I mean, why aren't any of these made to be part of the freestanding sign? That's especially if the new rules allow for more square footage. I think that's an argument I would hear.
I mean, I think the regulations are fine. Like, I mean, I would even say the 15-foot does seem a little restrictive based on some of the properties. I mean, I would think it's also a safety issue if you have to keep your sign so far in from the road that people need to are like turning their heads and squinting, trying to see what it even says.
That's what I was thinking. It's a safety issue.
Yeah.
well, but then you could argue the purpose of the sandwich board. Is it for advertising for here's my business, or is it a short temporary?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
I would even increase I would increase the 15-foot limit just for more to be in compliant, because it seems like, at least from your images, it seems like those are decent places for it, even if they're more than 15 feet. And I would still consider them a temporary sign. I just think like it's I just think you have an enforcement nightmare. Like, I don't know how you would enforce all that. Right? It's like,
Revenue stream, right? You just go around, start collecting them after business hours, and people have to come and pay $30 to pick them up.
It's like towing your car, huh?
Impound them, yeah.
so I would like, yeah, if it's a safety issue with them blowing over, I would say like getting sandbags to hold them down. And
I mean,
that sort of thing.
there's actually a stipulation in the Burlington rules, which we put in the draft, that says during the owner is required to take them away before high wind events.
Yeah.
I do think it is part of city councils of I mean, they've never really said why this bothers some members of council so much, but we certainly hear about sandwich boards. Maybe it's just it's so obvious that like if we have a certain rule and it's not being followed, right? So
Yeah,
what
we
do you
have lots of rules that aren't being followed. I just don't know if sandwich boards are the place to put the energy in. That's just my point. It's like
if 15 feet doesn't make sense, what makes sense? Would it be what Burlington is thinking of, just a reasonable distance?
Well, I mean, I come back to what Phil said. I was just thinking, I kind of read them as I'm driving down Pearl Street, but you can do that without moving your head very much. But if they're up against the building and people are, especially the joke one, everybody's used to the joke one now. It's a hazard. So some kind of reasonable distance, I think, is appropriate.
Okay.
Because each
Yeah.
property is completely different as well. I do think, though, that, and I don't know how you would enforce it, but, bringing them in after business hours, I think would be a good idea.
I mean, another example I'm thinking of, I don't even know if it's a sandwich board or not, but the VFW and how they advertise their events.
Their fish fry.
Well, yeah, I mean, they put out it's all done with those little letters. I don't know if that's a sandwich board. I can't picture it at this moment. But I can
That
picture
would,
it.
yeah.
I mean, I would say as long as it's on their property and not blocking any right of way. See why it should be a problem.
Okay. Oops. Okay, so in the draft, I'll change it from 15 feet to something like a reasonable distance. I mean, I'll talk to South Burlington and see what it's specific language they're thinking of. But but sticking with you must take it in when you're closed kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't know if we mentioned it, but a limit, I would assume, is a limit of 1.
There's actually, it's a little complicated. So it's 1 per business, but it also says it must not be within a certain number of feet of another one. So is that
Of another sign or
of
another,
another
sandwich,
sandwich
board?
board?
Yeah, but
So
that
like
makes sense with both.
who's there first, right? I mean, like it's a little bit hard, but I also get like if you go to the Big Lots Mall, if every single business puts out a sandwich board, I mean, that seems a little ridiculous to me. Okay, any more comments on sandwich boards?
Oh, I wanted to answer something from the previous section.
Put something up in the chat.
Oh yeah, there was
Yes,
something in
right.
the chat as well.
Yeah, that's me. So, somebody asked if wall signs could be eliminated, and just for clarification, there's a line under wall signs saying if eliminated, wall signs may be externally illuminated or backlit. So they do have options for wall sign illumination.
So actually, that means they cannot be neon.
Yeah.
It's called direct illumination. That wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you.
Okay. Next issue: multi-business freestanding signs. So, to me, this is kind of an important consideration if you were to clamp down on sandwich boards. Like this is kind of people's pathway to compliance, right? They want to still have visibility from the street. And if you want to do it in a more permanent looking way, this is how you allow it. Right now, the limits is 1 per lot in most cases, or 2 for large, for large properties. The size limit is as follows. It's under the Burlington rules. You would only be allowed 1. Maybe that's a little. I mean, maybe that's a little extreme. But yeah, I think I looked at South Burlington's, and South Burlington allows 1 freestanding sign per entrance per lot, as long as the entrances are more than 300 feet from one another. So effectively, I think it would end up being a 2 for something like the Post Office Square Mall. What makes sense in this case for Essex Junction?
Two for Post Office Square seems like a bit much.
They actually do have 2 already.
Yeah. Because they have 2 entrances.
They have 2 entrances. One of them, the secondary one, is required to be a lot smaller. That's probably why it's not as noticeable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing of the same example, but the other side of the street with the Essex Market, what's considered a business, would you then, if you're limited 1, does that mean the Essex Market has to go all the way down by the VFW? Or can they put a secondary one closer to their market?
Yeah, it wasn't
2 per property.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of limiting it to just 1. I was thinking maybe the
per-
South Burlington's like maybe at 500 feet or something like that.
Oh, just expanding.
Expanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking Post Office Square seems like that's a little small for 2 freestanding signs.
Mm-hmm.
At least the size that the bigger one that they currently have. But yeah, your example of the other side, that seems much more reasonable.
Expansive, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how we would.
I think I would probably need to see an example of what 300 feet looks like.
Yeah.
That might be hard for you to do in this moment. But I'm with you. I think it's expanding that 300 to 500 maybe.
Yeah, think of other properties that are big too. Don't have too many.
So this what I
Yeah.
this is 476 feet right here
Okay.
between these 2 entrances. So actually, under the if we went with South Burlington rules instead of Burlington's rules, this would probably I guess these 2 entrances,
because they're more than.
these 2 entrances are like 200. I'm trying to see if they would get 2 or if they would get 3.
No, well, I mean, I guess the other question, what is defined as per property? Because is the Essex Market there? It's all one building. So are you
Probably
saying,
depends on lot.
They're per lot, so there are 3 entrances to the lot, so they would only be able to basically choose the one by VFW, and then only one of the other 2 be eligible. They wouldn't be able to have 3 because the
No, not if you
linear
said,
distance is too short.
or if you just said you're allowed 2, not to be
Well,
less than 500 feet.
so if you think backwards, what do you think? Like a property like this, should the answer be 1, 2, or 3?
2.
2.
Okay.
2.
So then, sticking to something that is similar to our existing rules, actually, or some version of South Burlington's with slightly expanded gap would achieve that. So I mean, I can try to draft up something that would functionally result in this having this situation getting 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Um. All right, we should be approaching the end here.
It's too bad. This is fascinating.
Actually, I think that's really it. You know, I just so you all have a copy of the draft LDC amendments. I will draft up some of the changes based on discussion today, but I would really encourage you to take a close look at that and just think of some examples of anything that annoys you out there or something that you like, and see if if based on your interpretation it like we're allowing that, because I think these rules need to offer enough flexibility for businesses to grow and thrive, and we want to make sure that the rules are not stifling creativity. And as a department that deals with enforcement, I certainly want to make sure there's a viable path towards compliance whenever we're going out after somebody and telling them what they're doing has to stop.
So just for clarity, what would be the intention of the city for bringing signs into compliance? Because I would think that our intention for what we're doing is obviously for future signs to all be compliant, but I wouldn't necessarily want to go out there in some sort of enforcement rampage and
So
start actively going out and enforcing sign requirements. I would say unless there were complaints.
we will probably, in terms of enforcement protocol and priorities, that's the discussion I think we'll have to come back to. I certainly get pulled different directions for that. I've heard requests from city council that we need active enforcement, that with rental registry, the other 50% of the time of that person would be dedicated towards things like this.
Code
And there are many different ways to allocate enforcement efforts, right? I think one thing that I would say is certain is that signs that are legal right now would be grandfathered. I mean, this is zoning bylaw. When you change zoning bylaw, anything that's an existing nonconformity stays legal. If there's something that is currently already not legal and it's not legal under the new rules, we could go after for enforcement. If something is currently not legal, but under the new rules becomes legal, they're fine.
Yep.
So this is sort of related in a way, but given that you don't know when you're going to get a code enforcement officer, either part-time or full-time, and I assume that any amendment to the LDC has to be warned. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So one other option is instead of waiting for your code enforcement officer, which could be fiscal year next year as opposed to this fiscal year, thinking about how you might be able to have some kind of publicity on this. So it's more like talking about aesthetics and how it fits into the code, and some kind of outreach so that people are aware of what's legal or not legal, what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Because certainly, so
I know you probably don't have a budget for that, but I'm just thinking, and it's part of some kind of public outreach and engagement.
right, it's not as hard as some other public outreach and engagement because they're limited to commercial properties that tend to be the issues here. And we have done an enforcement blitz before. During the fall, we went out and inventoried all the temporary signs that were out permanently, and left a flyer with the business owner. Some of them put it right in the trash, but also but we know where they are and what kind of businesses they are when it's time to move forward with adoption of these of the land development code amendments, or earlier if you want. It could be a good time to do outreach. but I think you have to time these things to be the best time and not too early, because you actually want to attract the attention.
Yeah, I mean, I would say our responsibility and our role is to create the guidelines and obviously come into compliance so that we're not violating the First Amendment. But personally, I wouldn't prioritize enforcement of these.
Well, especially since you don't have an enforcement officer.
And actually, that is a topic we will come back to, enforcement priorities of our limited enforcement capabilities. What how we should what are the priorities? We'll come back to that. Okay, well that's it for sign stuff right now. Thank you for your patience. That was long, but it's also necessary to
No,
get through
that's
these details.
good presentation.
Yeah.
I appreciate having the examples.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to member updates. Any member updates?
Just real briefly, strategic planning. Next week, there'll be a meeting to discuss the second online survey that'll go up in the next couple of weeks. I think it's scheduled to be online for 2 weeks. And it's basically more specific on the 6 pillars and the sort of sub activities under the pillars. So we'll see the survey next week and be able to get a sense of what they're proposing to do. I think, I don't remember, Chris, when the proposed draft will go to the council. I thought it was end of April, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's still the latest. Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah.
Staff updates. This is where we decided we would talk about rental registry.
Yeah, so rental registry was on city council agenda last meeting, so February 28th, Wednesday. Also lots of public attention and time spent on that. And ultimately the city council decided to spend. I mean, there were some city councilors were thinking we need to take a bigger step back and start, to rethink the whole program. That something like this is important, but maybe we should consider all the possibilities, including registry only, no inspections to start, or looking for any ways to make it cheaper, or looking at writing in a stipulation about revisiting the fees on an annual basis to make sure there's no reserve being built up. I am currently working through some of that along with the fire chief. Oh yeah, and also another thing that came up as a big concern was how to make it clear what was being inspected for, what the inspection criteria was. There are a lot of nested rules, which goes into state building codes, fire and building safety codes, and there were concerns that this could lead, like a program like this could lead to nitpicking certain things, like railing being a little too low out of and not focusing on just the biggest life safety issues. We're still working on that. The fire chief is heavily involved in that part. There's no timeline at this point for when the city council will discuss this again.
Did you guys watch the meeting? Did you see me? So I did watch the meeting. I wasn't present, but I watched the video afterwards. Did they decide whether or not to take this out of the budget or leave it in the budget?
They took it out.
Okay. So it's not even in for this year.
No. But either ways, the intention was that it wouldn't have obligated them to to have to do this even
Right.
if it was in, because
Right.
it's revenue neutral.
Okay.
And in theory, I think they could still do it without adding it into the budget because it's supposed to be cost neutral.
So, the other thing that came up during the meeting was a suggestion that, the council consider meeting with the planning commission or meeting with the chair and one other person from the planning commission, which I disagree with. I think it should be the whole planning commission. And I would like to make a strong recommendation that it be the whole planning commission. And again, I think it's important that we just don't have a meeting about the rental registry, but we talk about what comes out of the strategic plan and what's in the comprehensive plan and how to move forward on what we're gonna focus on as a planning commission. So that would be my recommendation. I think there were people that didn't want to have a full meeting. My take from what I heard, there were some of the counselors who were objecting to a full meeting. But I would recommend that we have a full meeting, all planning commissioners.
I agree.
I would agree.
So, just so that gets passed on, Chris.
I will pass that on again. It's certainly been on the. Regina is aware of the desire to have a joint meeting at some point, and I think the city council is also, aware of that desire and need. Figuring out the best time to fit that in.
Yeah,
The most effective time, I think, is probably going to be the hardest part.
I think it might even be May after the draft strategic plan is in.
Right.
The other thing is, related to the rental registry, and again, I think what I heard from some of the counselors is stuff we talked about ad nauseum over the last year. Incentives for the landlords, programs to fund some of the repairs for low-income housing landlords. Whether or not we start with an index as opposed to a full, rental recovery program, a registry recovery program. So they revisit a lot of stuff we talked about. So it would be very beneficial to have this discussion. One other thing, I mentioned it to Regina once. If you do decide to go just down to an indexing registry as opposed to inspection, there are options to get volunteers. AmeriCorps will give you up to 2 years of a volunteer. That's definitely cost neutral. So some of these things could be explored.
Great. Any other updates?
No, I mean, my only, sorry, just to respond, as they said, city council was hesitant towards building a reserve. My only response to that is I think it should build a reserve so that there could be funds available in the future for grants to landlords to come into compliance.
Right. That does seem to be a kind of two conflicting desires, even among city council. I don't.
So
think
at least
they
they're
went-
discussing that. Okay.
They didn't go as far as to all agree on that. That was just one thing that came up. But the only thing they agreed on is that they weren't ready to move forward.
No, that's all.
I mean, they did talk about, Raj was talking about setting aside a portion of the fee to a landlord fund. But
Yeah.
if you do the numbers, you don't raise very much money. I think considering as part of the housing, if we're gonna have a housing committee, if we have a housing committee, talking about a housing trust fund that has a portion of that set aside.
Yes, they're both-
Makes a lot more sense,
so it's both
especially if you can
conceded.
fund it with grants and other mechanisms.
Mhm.
Anyway. We'll talk more about that in May.
Just need a motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Already halfway out the door. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Meeting adjourned. It is 8:49 p.m.
Excellent.